and welcome to my dungeon. This is Vaesen, a Nordic horror role-playing game. In this game master's perspective, I'm going to tell you who I think this game is for, give you a brief overview of the rules and show you my highlights of the game, and also tell you what I think which other role-playing games and other books you can use this with. If you like this kind of content, consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel. There's more where this came from. Also, there are ways to support my channel in the video description. So, let's get started. Who's this game for? To a bit of my shame, I have to admit, I didn't get this game right away when it came out 2 years ago. I thought it looked interesting enough and was showered in awards like the Annies, but it seemed to me to be very focused on this Nordic mythology theme. And I'm not especially interested in Nordic mythology in my horror games. I'm more of a cosmic horror guy, Call of Cthulhu guy myself. But now that I've actually read the book, I see how wrong I was. Sure, the game is focused on the Vaesen, on these creatures of Nordic mythology and on mystery, investigation and horror. But there's so much more good stuff in there, especially the Game Master section that describes in detail and teaches you how to write and run mystery adventures is one of, if not the best that I've ever read within an RPG. And this section alone makes it a useful book for any GM really. No matter if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, Candela Obscura, Mythos World, or even just plain old Dungeons and Dragons. If you are interested in running investigation adventures, mystery adventures and horror adventures, this GM section is a great resource to have. And I wish I had found that out 2 years ago. One thing you will find throughout the book is the beautiful artwork by Johan Egerkrans, also came up with the original concept of the game. This artwork is striking and sets the tone for the game. Kind of dark fairy tale. Sure, there's horror, but it also got its own charm and kinda whimsical magic to it. But let me tell you, with different artwork, this would be a much darker game. Especially the included adventure, from its text and content alone, is a very bleak, horrible prospect. And not so much because of the monster and anything that the monster does, but because of the human element and the monstrous things that humans can do. Let me explain the basic rules of Vaesen with the help of the character sheet. What your character can do is described by their attributes, which range from 2 to 5, and their skills, which range from 0 to 5. Whenever your character does something that is difficult and the outcome could have dire consequences, you roll a check, a skill check, by taking a number of die for your attribute, a number for your skill, and additionally you might get more dice from your equipment or from the help of your teammates, up to 3 dice from the help. Roll all of these dice and hope that you get 6s. Only 6s are a success, and an especially difficult roll might need more than 1 6, or if you're doing an opposed roll, you have to get more 6s than the opposition. And if you don't succeed, you can push the roll, meaning you take all of the die that don't show a 6 and roll again. Hopefully getting more 6s for greater success. But when you do, you have to take a condition. Depending if the skill you use is a physical skill or a mental skill, you either have to suffer a physical or a mental condition. This is your wound system. These conditions add up. You are exhausted, battered, wounded and finally broken. or you're angry, frightened, hopeless, and finally broken. The first 3 mean that you get a penalty of 1 die less, up to 3 die less, from your wounded condition, for any roll where it is applicable. The broken condition means that your character can no longer act. Either they're so wounded, maybe unconscious that they can't act, or they are running away muttering to themselves, or frozen with fear, so they can no longer act when they suffer a mental condition. And when the character is broken, they also have to roll on the critical injury table. More on that later. It is possible that the character break themselves by taking a condition, by pushing a roll. But these penalties are only applied after the roll, so maybe it is worth it breaking the character to make a really important roll. Anyhow, you can only push a roll once, and if that doesn't lead to success, then the character has failed with that roll and has to suffer the consequences. Vaesen does not know mixed success from its mechanic, like Powered by the Apocalypse game, for example, or Candela Obscura. But there's a big block reminding that GM that a failed roll should not stop the action. You as the GM should make sure that something happens that pushes the action forward, even if the players fail the rolls. And in a later section, in the mystery section, you're reminded that you should not require a roll for the characters to notice the important clues of the adventure, else you risk that they can't solve the mystery because of a single botched roll, and that would be no fun for anyone. Your character is also described by their relationships with the other characters, here front and center, their talents, which lets them do things that are beyond the normal rules. Insights and defects are gained by the broken condition, by critical injuries, and can become permanent after an adventure. Advantages is something you gain by preparing for an investigation, maybe going to a local library, maybe making an especially important contact, or maybe bringing a special piece of magical equipment. Anything that could give you an advantage that is not covered by the rest of the rules. And these are used only once, only for one roll, and then they are used up. Then you get your equipment, general equipment, that will generally give you a die bonus for a specific roll. Your armor, which is absorption armor, in the form of dice you have to roll. And if the die shows a 6, you get 1 less on your condition track when you are hit. Weapons that do damage on condition tracks have a range and a bonus for the attack. And finally, a memento, a personal item of your character that they can interact with to regain points on the condition track. Overall, I wouldn't describe this as a storytelling game like Powered by the Apocalypse is. This is more of a simulationist game, that makes sense for us. So it's more akin to something like Dungeons and Dragons and should be pretty easy for anyone to get into. The rules are not super light, but they are also not so complicated that they should slow down the action at any point. And the core of the rules, as you just saw, can be explained in 5 minutes.
Character creation is straightforward. You choose an archetype, age, name, distribute attribute points, distribute skills, choose one of 3 talents from your archetype, choose motivation, trauma, and a dark secret, define your relationship with each of the other player characters, roll for a memento, and choose your equipment. And the only steps here where you really have to play the numbers game is attribute points and skill distribution. The rest is all for the background and the flavor of your character. What they are about and why they are investigating Vaesen. Their motivation, their past trauma, the dark secrets. This is Nordic role-playing after all, so of course everyone has a dark secret. And you get examples for all of this within the chosen archetype. Beyond the attributes and the skills, a character has talents. Some stuff they can do that is beyond the basic skills. Like, for example, this doctor's talent, emergency medicine, ignore mental conditions when using medicine. Or this occultist's talent, you can strike fear into the hearts of your enemies. And if you think that an archetype is too limiting, in the back you find an alternative character creation system using background tables to either roll on or choose the life path of your character, which I think is a really nice touch. Combat rules are pretty minimal and should feel familiar to anyone who's played a role-playing game before. You have initiative and rounds. It uses combat zones rather than a grid for movement. You have your close combat rules, ranged weapons, dodging and parrying, holding and wrestling, fleeing and chasing, ambushing and sneak attacks, and the injury system. So the combat system is not very exhaustive, but it covers all the bases and should serve you well in a game that is not very combat focused. The injury system, beyond the condition system, when your character takes more damage when they are broken either by physical injury or critical injury, you get to roll on the critical injury table to determine what is actually breaking your character. Some of these are fatal if not treated within a few days or a few hours, or if you're really unlucky, even a few rounds. And they impart a defect on your character, some kind of penalty on a specific roll. But if you're lucky in your bad luck, you could instead gain an insight, gaining a major bonus. So getting critically injured is not necessarily a bad thing. Same for mental critical injuries. In the case of the mental critical injuries, the time limit is not until your characters die, but when it becomes chronic if it is not treated. This is again a simple and robust system, but the possibility of getting permanent injury or permanent bonuses through insights makes it interesting. Then we get some special effects you might come across. Fear, of course, explosions, fire, poison, falling damage, hungry, tired, and thirsty. Finally, the rules for healing your injuries, treating critical injuries, and healing your conditions. It doesn't take a very long time to heal, but this is probably something that the characters will do in between adventures. We got a robust equipment system here. Much of the equipment is not something that your characters are supposed to carry with them everywhere and have at call at every time, but something they procure just to go out and solve one mystery. And the whole resource system is rather abstract and gives you a value between 1 and 8 depending on your archetype and how many skill points you put into your resources to determine how wealthy the character is. We've got a robust list of equipment here. Armor, which is basic absorption armor, melee weapons, ranged weapons, and basic goods and services. And for each of these, they also give you a hard bonus. For example, the crowbar gives you a 1 die bonus when you're breaking locks with force. Or you could also have a guard dog or hunting dog plus 3 bonus for vigilant, close combat and investigation. Very solid list here, should serve you well. The default setting of Vaesen assumes that the player characters belong to a society based in Uppsala that is investigating these mysteries and these Vaesen occurrences. So we get the background of the Order of Artemis and its founding, its disappearance and re-emergence as your game starts with the player characters becoming the new society. And they also get their own headquarters in Uppsala, Castle Gillenkreuz, where during a long-form campaign the characters return to recover, recuperate, and prepare for the next mystery. And this headquarters can be upgraded throughout the campaign by experience points that you earn after each adventure. You can put in an armory, or pigeon loft, maybe a workshop, to make the place you own and make it fit your playstyle. And also make some useful contacts and hire stuff for your castle. And all of this stuff is not just window dressing, it serves some kind of function, gives you some kind of special ability and special bonus. And I think this is a really nice touch. It gives the group a place to return to, a place they can make their own, they can see grow. And certainly one of my players is really into this stuff. While we are talking about campaign play, let me briefly touch on experience points. At the end of each session, the players have to answer a number of questions, and for each question you can answer with yes, you get an experience points. So this is meant to reward a certain play style. It's called the Vaesen play style. We got the following 8 questions. Did you participate? Yes. Did you confront any Vaesen? Most likely. Did you identify a previously unknown Vaesen? Maybe. Were you affected by your dark secret? Did you take risks to protect other people? Have you learned anything, and what? Did you develop something in your headquarters? And did you perform an extraordinary action? So this is a playstyle focusing on investigating the Vaesen and saving other people. So heroic mystery, if you would call it that. And I would encourage you to add or replace some of these questions to make it more personal to the playstyle you want to have in your group. For example, you might add the question, have you risked your life for another investigator? Or has your relationship to another investigator changed in a meaningful way? Remember, the relationships are front and center on the character sheet, so you might want to reward the players for playing upon these relations. Anyway, when you've gained 5 XP, you can buy in advance. That means you may increase the value of a skill by 1 or buy a new talent. Also note that you can freely choose any of the talents you want, including those of other archetypes. Notice that you can only buy skills and talents. You cannot increase your attributes. They are fixed from character creation. Additionally, you will gain development points that you can use to upgrade your headquarters for a different number of questions. Did you play at least one scene at the headquarters? Did you encounter a new type of Vaesen? Did you visit a place of magic? Were you subjected to magic? Did you bring occult books or other important items back to headquarters? Did you make important contacts? Was the mystery particularly difficult and epic? And did you solve the mystery? So gain personal XP to upgrade your character, and you gain XP for the society to upgrade your headquarters with the development points. Furthermore, for the default setting we have the Mystic North and Uppsala. Scandinavia in the 19th century. As the power of industry changes the land and society to its core. People move from the countryside into the cities, leaving deserted villages behind. The new ways of technology enable never before seen production and levels of wealth, but at the cost of nature and tradition that is left in the dust and burned in the fires of industry. It is a brief description of the setting, just enough to set the mood and get you started. And while the Mystic North is the default setting, this entire conflict between tradition, mysticism, nature and industry happened all around the world during Industrial Revolution. So you can set this wherever you want and use monsters from whatever folklore interests you. The book gives you all the tools you need for that. And so we come to one of the highlights of Vaesen, the Vaesen itself, the mystical monsters of Scandinavia. Trolls and fairies and ghosts and witches, demons and devils, and so forth. The book tells us what they actually are, how you can handle them and use them for your adventures, what they can do, what they can't do, some magic they can do, and for each individual Vaesen we get a double page with a nice picture, examples of conflict, brief description and the stats, their magical powers, the conditions that the Vaesen may suffer, and their combat attacks. And finally, a ritual of banishment. Vaesen cannot be killed as such. No matter how many shotguns and Molotov cocktails you bring to the fight, at best you can hope to wound them, make them retreat for a while. But to get rid of them, you have to perform a banishment ritual, and a huge part of the game is finding out what that ritual is and then performing it. It's easy to get too focused on that one point, have that the default goal of any adventure being that ritual to find it out and to perform it, to banish the Vaesen. But that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. There might be other ways to solve the conflict between the Vaesen and the people. Maybe it's not the Vaesen's fault at all, and instead you have to stop the people that are abusing the Vaesen's power for their own gains. Or maybe the Vaesen is not actually the source of the conflict, but just your background that is there and can be a problem for your investigation, but the entire conflict is between people themselves, like a good old murder mystery. We've got a lot of these Vaesen and a lot of potential mysteries to solve and adventures to have. Few example NPCs and some tables to make them unique, animals, and, what might be most interesting, tools to create your own Vaesen, or take a monster of mystery that you like and put it into game terms. May you want a Baba Yaga, terrible witch from Eastern Europe. Finally, the mystery, which I think is the best part of the entire game. Vaesen teaches you, the game master, what a mystery is and how to create and how to run a mystery investigation adventure. You have your Vaesen, you have your conflicts, your primary conflicts, but also your secondary conflict. The primary conflict is usually between people and the Vaesen, and the secondary conflict is between people themselves. And for all of these concepts we get two concrete examples, which makes it very easy to understand what they're actually on about. We have our misdeeds, or the inciting incident that starts your investigation. Of course we have the location, atmosphere, very important in horror game. The clues that you give your players to eventually solve the mystery. They make the important point here that your players are not Sherlock Holmes. They cannot be, because Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character. You have to give your players much more clues and much better clues than Sherlock Holmes, so they have a chance to solve the mystery even if they are misinterpreting or missing some of your clues. Again, we got a few very good examples. We got advice on how to structure the mystery. Prologue, invitation, preparation, journey, the investigation, the places, the challenges, the clues itself, and then finally the confrontation, the aftermath. Again, with concrete examples to make sense of it. In some flow charts, how you might structure all of these. With these flow charts you can create a standard 3-act structure for your story, which is good for a one-shot. If you want to run a slightly longer adventure, I would suggest you make a 5-act structure. What you would do is replace the confrontation with a turning point, which might also be a confrontation, but is not designed to solve the story, but rather reveal that there's more to the story. Maybe the characters find out that the Vaesen is not what they thought it to be. It's actually a different Vaesen and they have to flee. Or maybe the Vaesen is just working for a bigger Vaesen. Some reveal, some turn of events that requires the characters to regroup, rethink their approach, maybe investigate one or two more places before they can go to the final confrontation. And at the end of this chapter we get some random tables you can roll on to get some ideas, get started in writing your own mysteries. And with these tables and the Vaesen and the examples in this GM section, you have a lot of adventures to go to. These examples that are strewn throughout these chapters are all from 2 adventures. And after running the example adventure in the back of the book and using the tools from this chapter, it shouldn't be too hard to use these examples and elaborate to them to write a complete adventure. So you could say you have actually 3 adventures in the book. 1 explicitly written out, 2 given to you as a framework to expand on. Then of course you have all the random tables and all the Vaesen to make up all the adventures you need. Last but not least, we get the example adventure, the Dance of Dreams. Set entirely within the Witch Cat Inn, it can be played in a single session, but you can also elaborate on it, make it a 2-shot, or maybe make it the starting off point of a campaign. There's certainly enough hints in the text here that there's more to the whole story than meets the eye at first glance. And as of the making of this video, there is indeed a campaign out for Vaesen, the Lost Mountain Saga, which is based upon an actual play podcast, but I think it is continuing the plot points from the core rulebook adventure. Anyway, this adventure is surprisingly dark. It's a story about ritual murder, revenge beyond the grave, but also the oppression of women and domestic abuse. This is a Nordic horror game after all, and it's not necessarily for the faint at heart. So yeah, Vaesen. Now that I've read it, I regret not having read it 2 years ago. This is a great game in its own right, but it also has some of the best GM tools in the genre. This section about how to run a mystery, how to write a mystery, is just so useful for any game of this kind. You can use all of these techniques and hints and tables. You can use all of these techniques and tables as well in Vaesen as you could use them for a game of Call of Cthulhu, or Darker Streets and Darker Nightmares, or just if you want to insert a single mystery adventure in your regular game of Dungeons and Dragons. These techniques are universal and they are very well explained, very easy to understand in this game. Hey Free League, if you're watching this video, I would love for you to take just the GM sections out of your games and make them, build on them, make them into their own book of just universal GM advice. There is potential for that being one of the most useful books for a game master in the history of the hobby.
So yeah, that's Vaesen. A great role-playing game, not only about Nordic horror, but a great resource for mystery and horror games in general. For now, dreamers, I bid thee farewell until we shall meet again.